Welcome to the Naples Preserve Virtual Nature Program Series. Today's speaker is Ashlee O'Connor. She is a Panther outreach specialist for the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission. Previously, she was a wildland firefighter and wildlife biologist at two national wildlife refuges, the Florida Panther and the 10,000 Island one. She has a Bachelor of Science degree in Wildlife and Fisheries Science from the University of Tennessee, which is her home state.
Here is our beginning of the presentation. Like Lou said, my name is Ashlee O'Connor, the Panther Outreach Specialist for our state's Natural Resource Agency, the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, or FWC for short. And here's my email if anybody is interested in discussing panthers, or you need help or have more questions. I'm available as a resource for you. So here's a bit about what I will discuss today: some biology and ecology, their ranges, impacts to the population, some resources for living with them, how to know if there's a panther in the area, how to avoid certain interactions, and then what to do if you do see a panther in the flesh. So what is a Florida panther? Currently, they are listed as a subspecies of puma. They are puma concolor, which means the cat of one color, and then coriae denotes the cat that lived in the southeast United States. They're a large feline that is a hypercarnivore, so they're really exclusively eating meat for the most part. And then, we call this a panther, but people call it a cougar, a mountain lion, a puma, a catamount, a painter, ghost cat. The list goes on, and they cover multiple countries. So there's multiple languages with many names, probably in every language. But they're all denoting this tan cat, this puma concolor cat. So what do they look like? They're around 2 feet at the shoulder and 7 to 8 feet long. They could be a little bit shorter, some of the females that might be smaller. Here in Florida, we have documented them at being 60 to 160 pounds. Females averaging around 80 or so, males averaging around 130, where the males are larger than the females. In many cases, you certainly could have a 100-pound male and a 100-pound female. So these cats are tan, like I've just touched on, but they do have a bit of black on them. And we've got that highlighted here in these slides. So the back of the ears is going to be all black. There will be a little bit of black around the muzzle, and then the very tip of the tail. This is not going to be extremely noticeable, but they are, the ears are particularly important, and I'll get to that in a bit. But these cats are tan, and they can be sort of grayish tan, golden, reddish, but all in that tan and tawny sort of category. So more about their coloration. Though they're tan as an adult, when they're in their infancy, they're tan with black spots. And you can see that in these images on the screen. That tan with spots helps to camouflage the kittens. As you can see in the upper right-hand photo, those are 3 kittens that are on the forest floor in a den. And they do camouflage quite well. And then the kittens also have blue eyes when they're born. And as they grow older, those blue eyes turn to a more of a yellowish greenish color as an adult. So these animals can breed all year long. This is more common in Florida because our climate is agreeable to that sort of life habit. A female will be in estrus for about 7 days, and so she'll spend that 7 days with a male. They have found each other through scent markings and then through auditory calling. They will copulate frequently, and then the male will go on his way and have no further part in the raising of his offspring. So the female will gestate for about 3 months, and then she'll give birth in typically a saw palmetto thicket or very dense vegetated area, like sometimes Brazilian pepper is a place we found dens as well, but it's a very dense area. And our biologists, if they are going into the den, if it's a collared cat and we know that she is denning, they will do a workup, and they literally have to belly crawl in to get to where the kittens are. So it's not a place that you're going to stumble upon. The female has had usually 2 to 3 kittens, and when they're born, their eyes are closed and their ears are folded down. So they have a long upbringing. They're going to spend around up to 9 to 18 months with their mother. The first few months, she'll be lactating, and they'll just have a diet of their mother's milk, and then she'll introduce meat from the kills that she makes. So after about 9 to 18 months, the offspring have figured out how to be a panther. Their mother has taught them where to hunt and how to hunt. Then that is the time of dispersal. So her offspring is sort of like the going off to college, if you will, for humans. This is the time where her young leave her care and go off on their own. And then that allows the female to come into a reproductive state again. But as her offspring leave, typically the female offspring don't really go that far. They might take up a territory adjacent to or encompassing in some part of their mother's territory. But her male offspring, they're going to have to disperse quite far. They are going off on their own to find a territory that's vacant, or they're going to find a territory and potentially fight the local male for that spot. So these animals live about 10 to 15 years in the wild. There's a lot of things that can affect how long they live. We have documented one of our females, our collared females. She was collared, and her collar died, the battery died on it at about 19 years of age. So we know they can live quite long lives. So these are some of the habitats that you'll see them in. They love the oak hammocks, the high uplands here on the top right. You'll also find them in pine flatwoods. You can even, as if you know much about Florida, we have a lot of wetland, we have a lot of water here, especially in the summertime, and they are adapted for that habitat as well. They can swim. They don't take to water quite as much as, say, a jaguar might, but they are documented going around or maybe crossing through wet areas. So food, like we talked about earlier, they are carnivores, so they eat meat. Here at the top, we've got 2 trail cameras that documented panthers literally in the act of trying to get a meal. And those are their 2 most popular food choices, so white-tailed deer and wild hogs. But they'll also feast on a variety of other mammals that we have here in Florida, possums, raccoons, armadillos, rabbits. And then as humans, we bring animals into our lives, and unfortunately, they have come up on the menu for a panther. And you can see here a list on the right of the various pets and domesticated livestock that we have documented panthers consuming. And we'll get to later in the presentation ways we can help mitigate this. So a little bit about their ecology. These are apex predators. So as an adult, they are at the top of the food chain here in our ecosystem, and they play an important role helping to manage the amount of deer on the landscape. They're also considered a keystone species, so they play an important role in the ecosystem. And if you take them out, there will be a degradation of the ecosystem. So this is a really fun infograph from Wild Futures and Panther about how mountain lions, so this is produced out west, how they can help the health and biodiversity of the ecosystem. They can be called ecosystem engineers as well. So by making a kill of typically an ungulate, a deer, an elk, they're going to feed on that carcass, and then other scavengers are going to come and feed on it as well. And then all the bacteria and the microbes and the fungi that are going to flourish in that carcass and help break that down into nutrients that the soil will use. So it's a really great understanding of kind of that cycle of life. The panther is also known as an umbrella species, and what that means is that when we protect land for panthers, we are putting an umbrella. We are also protecting many other species that live on that landscape as well. So the Florida black bear, gopher tortoises, indigo snakes, glass lizards, red-cockaded woodpeckers. That's just to name a few species that we have in this area, but not just animals, also plants as well. And then here in the middle, you know, I have a picture of my two children, and I put them in that because I think that when we protect the panther, we are protecting a landscape for future generations to experience, to learn, to thrive in, to hopefully see panthers and these other plants and animals on the landscape as well. So preserving a wild future for our children and grandchildren and the next generations to come. I love this picture because I think it really helps everyone understand the size ratio of cats that are seen on the landscape, especially here in Southwest Florida. So we've got our panther on the left, very large cat with that long tail. And the thing that I want you to remember is that tail can touch the ground. They don't drag it. They're not often touching it to the ground, but it is long enough that they can touch the ground. That, in contrast to the bobcat, which can look large depending on the, how you're seeing it, but their tail, which could also be considered long, will never touch the ground. So that's an important thing to remember when you're out identifying a cat, maybe in a real life setting where you don't get the best view or a long opportunity to look at it, is the tail. And then we've got our house cat. We've got a lot, especially where I live in Golden Gate Estates. There's cats that are feral cats that are just out on the landscape. And what I want you to notice is they do have that long tail, but domestic house cats are often carrying it up like that, whereas panthers are going to be more sloping towards the ground. So that's also something to take into consideration when you're viewing a cat. This is also a helpful image. We have this on our website if you want to check it out, but I'll highlight again the panther and bobcat silhouettes there in yellow and in orange. That's the size difference of those two animals compared to each other. Another thing I want to talk about is the ears. So earlier we talked about how panthers have a black on the back of their ears. Bobcats, in contrast, have a white patch on the back of their ears. And even if you're seeing the animals from the side, sometimes you can actually catch a glimpse of that white patch on the bobcat. So that's another helpful identifier to consider when you're viewing wildlife. So here are other panthers of the world, and the term panther can describe many different animals depending on where you are in the world. So if you're in, say, Mexico or Central and South America, the term panther could be referring to a jaguar. It could be a puma, which also live in that range, but they also could be a jaguar. So on the top left, we've got our common jaguar pelage. On the right, we have the melanistic coloration of the jaguar. If you were in, say, Asia or Africa and someone said the term panther, then they would be referring to a leopard. So on the bottom left, we've got the common coloration of the leopard, and then on the right, you have the black or melanistic phase of that species. So the term panther, it's kind of like sneaker. It can mean a bunch of different types of things. But here in Florida, it just means puma. So here's some of the ranges that I wanted to display for everyone. On the right, the green is the current distribution of the puma in the Western Hemisphere. So you can see it covers many, many latitudes, which is quite unique. And I want to highlight how our green population there in Florida is very much isolated from all the other cats that live in the Western Hemisphere. And that's unique to our cat, and it's an important factor that plays in the role of the recovery of this cat in the southeast of the United States. On the left, you're seeing a historic map of the subspecies delineations that were recorded a long time ago. So in yellow would have been the Corii subspecies. So you can see panthers or pumas roamed all over the lower 48 and even up into parts of Canada. And you can see the eastern United States is now devoid of that predator, which has sort of a cascading effect of impacts to the ecosystems that are in the eastern United States. Home ranges. So these animals need a lot of space. Males around 200 square miles, females less than half that, about 80 square miles. And these are some actual polygons of cats that were collared here in Southwest Florida. So at the bottom left of the screen is Naples, and you can kind of see where Marco Island sticks out. And then these are to the east on the Panther Refuge and Big Cypress and other privately owned lands and cattle ranches and things. You can see how both males and females, they have home ranges that do overlap. The important part of the males having home ranges that overlap is they're going to avoid each other. They're going to leave scent markings, and they're going to generally try to avoid each other, because if they don't, they can and will, in some cases, fight to the death over that territory. Where the females, in contrast, their home ranges will overlap, but they are not territorial like the males are. They're going to avoid each other, but they're not going to fight to the death over a territory. And the interesting thing I want you to notice is that sort of in the center of this map, there's many home ranges that kind of overlap adjacent to each other. There's a potential there that is a multi-generational sort of family, if you will. That could be, say, the offspring, the mother, the grandmother, to that cat, which I think is pretty interesting. So the protections that we have for panthers, they are listed as endangered, but they did not have any protection whatsoever until 1950, which was not that long ago. It was 1950 when they were declared a game species. So there was a bag limit and a season. But up until 1950, you could shoot as many of these as you wanted. In 1958, the state of Florida was really paying close attention, and they listed it as endangered. And then in 1967, the federal government followed up with a federal endangered status. And then when the Endangered Species Act came into fruition, the panther was then pulled underneath the protection of the Endangered Species Act. So they are, like I've said, federally endangered, and that is the most conservative protection. If we didn't have that protection, then the state would be protecting the animal, but the federal government has the most conservative protection, so that's what we rely on first. They are geographically isolated, as you can see from this map from the organization Panther. That is important to their genetic diversity. We have a current population estimation of the cats in this area as 120 to 230 adults and subadults. And it's adults and subadults because the infant survivalship is only about 30%. So maybe 1 in 3 kittens actually survives to a breeding age. And this is the population estimation was from our 2015 assessment. So we know that number has likely changed somewhat from 6 years ago now. So what's impacting our panthers? Number one, habitat loss and fragmentation. There are, I think there's there's thousands of people, I believe, that are coming to the state every day. So in this large image you see here on the right, that is what we are experiencing, is a new development directly adjacent to wildlands, where these animals are looking for their deer hunting grounds, and then they come up into your backyard. And that's important for the safety of the animal and the safety of us. Illegal killing, we know that's something that is happening in Florida. This is actually a picture of a cat that was shot in Georgia. And through DNA analysis, we were actually able to identify this as a Florida Panther because of that cat's father, who was a collared cat at one point in time. So this man shot an endangered species, and that's one example of where we've been able to follow through with an illegal killing, but it is something that's really hard for us to know about, to investigate, and then to help hold those people accountable because of private lands and the remoteness of the areas where these cats live, and we don't actually have many of them collared. I believe right now we have 4 cats at most collared that we are monitoring. So there's most of the population doesn't have a collar on it. Other issues that are impacting them, inbreeding. So that is a product of their isolation. And because they have no new genetic material coming into the population, back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, that's where these cats really got into trouble, was cats that were too closely related in a small population, say of 30 or less cats at that time. Those relatives having offspring or attempting to have offspring was part of what got them into a very precarious state. Diseases, introduced diseases, so diseases that are domestic and feral cats carry, and other things. Vehicle strikes are one of the biggest killers of the population. And then climate change is also something that it is and will continue to impact panthers. So here's a kind of a more detailed look at habitat loss and fragmentation. So it's not just that we're taking the habitat away, it's that we're chopping it up into these little pieces that are bisected by roads, highways, and other things like that. So here is a map from the Florida Wildlife Corridor that can help you see some of the areas that need to be protected so that animals can move throughout the state, not just panthers, but bears and other wildlife. So here's what's projected to happen in Florida. Many people are moving here. Development sort of never seems to stop. Or even slow down. So if you contrast this with the previous slide, it doesn't leave a lot of connected land for wildlife to move through Florida. Here's some more about illegal hunting. Many of you, if you live in Naples, know about Uno, who was shot in the face and the hind by a shotgun. And we were able to keep him alive, and he became an ambassador for our species. But there are many situations where we don't know what happened. One thing I do want to say is many of the vehicle strikes, the panthers that are hit by a vehicle, that we collect their carcass, we do a full necropsy, and many times we actually find shrapnel and birdshot and lead pieces in the animal that were not the cause of their fatality. The actual strike from the vehicle was. But I think that that's interesting that they're kind of being harassed and surviving it. So we know it is a big problem. Inbreeding. So back in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, we did some population estimations, and we surmised that there was probably no more than 30 cats or less out on the landscape in Florida. And so with 30 cats, many of those were too closely related. So that created low genetic diversity, and that inbreeding caused many problems. External factors like the kink tail and the cowlick, but there are other more serious things happening like the atrial septal defect. That's the heart in the middle. So that's a panther heart, and a chunk of it is taken away. So you can see that there's a hole in between two of the chambers. They had depressed immune systems because of the inbreeding, which could lead to the acquiring other diseases and being affected by other things that they may not have been as challenging before. So this is something that is sort of ongoing because of their isolation. So in 1995, we brought in neighboring cats from Texas, females, 8 of them, to breed with our local males. We collared them so we could track their movements and know when they're denning. And that helped save the species. That helped get us to where we are today. But we're starting to see some of those cowlicks and kinktails resurface again. So one injection of new genetic material is not necessarily something that's going to keep them at a healthy state forever. So that's something that our agency and our biologists and biologists that study large cats are aware of. Disease. So there's many diseases out there that our cats can get from feral cats and other wildlife. There's also FLM, the new neuromuscular disease that's affecting panthers and bobcats, which you can see on the right here. It's affecting their ability to walk. We are still investigating that disease, trying to figure out what's going on. So we've set up a lot of cameras, and we're collecting samples from any cats that we can to do our best to understand what this disease is and how it's being transmitted. Roadways are such a big thing for panthers. They're constantly having to cross them, and they just don't make it a lot of the times. So here's another Florida wildlife corridor map with the major roads bisecting many of those green spaces. And so we're working on things to address this. And we'll get to that in just a minute. Climate change. If the temperature of the planet continues to rise, this is projected to be what Florida could look like. And most of the panther habitat is in the central part of the state, but if the coastal regions become uninhabitable, people are going to move into the central part of the state. So that's what's really going to affect the panther is our further intrusion into their habitat. So wildlife crossings are a huge thing that have really helped decrease vehicle strikes of panthers, but we need more of them. So there's many different kinds. We've got really large ones on Alligator Alley, but because of remote camera sensing, we're learning that they're using smaller crossings like this one on the right. It wasn't intended for panthers, but they're using it. So because of science and technologies and cameras and things like that, we're learning how we can make smarter choices, less money spent on these massive crossings. So maybe more crossings for the same amount of money. Here's another image of this is a crossing that's actually on Immokalee Road. You can barely tell it's there, and it was not intended for panthers. You can see this man is about 6 feet tall on the bottom right, and this female cat up on the top left is about to cross under that with her 2 kittens there. So we can implement a lot of different kinds of crossings to help not just panthers, but all the wildlife move around the landscape. So recovery efforts, I touched on this a little bit earlier, the genetic restoration, that was the 8 female cats from Texas. Then other things that we're doing to help recover the population would be habitat preservation. So mitigation during the new developments that are coming up, conservation easements, so helping our large landowners, our farmers, and our ranchers keep those lands undeveloped. And then we're really lucky down here in South Florida to have so much public land. But that's not the case as you head north in the state. As you head north, there's a lot of private farms and ranches. So easements and other opportunities are going to be really crucial as this population here expands north in the state. And then our underpasses with fencing. So the really important part is not just the underpass, but is the fencing that funnels the animals to that path underneath the roadway. So we have a response plan. This is something that many states with predators and carnivores have in place. Western states that have puma populations have a response plan, and so we tried to sort of glean information from that to create our own. And we have this plan because we know that when you have an animal like a panther and humans living on the landscape together, there's a high probability for some sort of interaction there. So we want to know what to do, when to do it, how to do it if something were to happen. So the plan has 3 sections. It has our human-panther interactions, depredations, and outreach. So with the interactions, we've defined 5 ways to interact with a panther. One being kind of the most safe option, just a sighting, very low risk to everyone, all the way up to an attack, which would be the most extreme interaction that you could have. So depredations, that's when a panther kills a pet or livestock. And is it always a panther? The answer is no. Florida is still very wild. We're really lucky. We have tons of predators down here that all will take the opportunity to take a pet or livestock animal. So we've got dogs, coyotes, bears, bobcats, possums, owls, hawks. And then we've got an influx of non-native invasive species like pythons or tegus that could potentially be impacting pets and livestock. So here are a variety of species that I just talked about, from our black bears. Domestic dogs do a lot of damage, and it's a bit comical because we don't want to assume that our sweet dog did this horrible thing, but it happens. And all of these animals do their dirty work, if you will, in a different way. So they all kill pets and livestock differently. And so they leave a little trail of information for us as biologists to figure out who done it. Here, this is a picture of me up on the top left doing a python capture training when I worked with the federal government. And then I want to also highlight on the bottom right, that is a black or melanistic coyote. So that is also something that gets confused as a black panther. So yeah, just a quick snapshot of some of the animals that are doing damage to pets and livestock. Outreach. So this is my focus, is connecting with our community, with our residents, with our visitors, to make sure they understand that these cats are out there and how to safely share the landscape. So if you have pets and livestock, you've got to take care of them, and having proper enclosures is very important, because especially where I live in Golden Gate Estates, this bottom image, these cats just show up. Maybe there was a water fountain or something that attracted them to this property. And if you have livestock there, they're going to take the opportunity to get an easier meal. So there are programs out there, like Defenders of Wildlife has a program to set up a pen, like on the top right. They'll split the cost with you. So that's a really important aspect of owning animals. Livestock guardian dogs. So these are my dogs that we have on our property, and they are another tool in the toolbox of helping us share the landscape safely. There's specific breeds of a certain quality that can do this job. These dogs are mostly nocturnal. They bark all night. They don't bark all night long, but they are active at night when the predators are out. And so they are barking more at night because they're sensing threats nearby. They live and they bond with the stock. You don't just want to have one dog, because that dog will get worn out. And it's not a silver bullet. This is just one layer of protection. You're still going to need other things to help keep pets and livestock safe. So here's just a variety of images of different breeds of dogs living with different animals. You can see that these dogs are very bonded with their stock. They're very calm and protective and gentle with their stock, but as soon as a threat is sensed, they're like a totally different creature. And this one in the middle has a spike collar on that can really help with like packs of coyotes or packs of wolves, so that dog is a bit safer. So there's a bunch of resources. I love livestock guardian dogs. I'm a big fan of them. There's lots of information out there about them. Fencing is also crucial. If you want to keep a panther out of your fence, you're going to have 12-foot high fencing with an overhang, because these cats can jump 15 feet in the air. So the fence at my house that's 5 feet, they could just jump over it. They will find dogs on the other side of that fence at my house, but that's something that I need everybody to remember. They are very capable. They can bound like over 30 feet horizontally. So they're just very capable. Electric fencing can be really helpful around a chicken coop as maybe an extra deterrent, especially with bears also being in the area. There's other deterrents like the water scarecrow. There's like flashing lights that make noises and things like that. So these are all additional layers to keeping our pets and livestock safe. So we'll talk quickly about some of the signs that you might see that will tell you that there is a panther in the area. So number one being scat. It's going to be segmented, long, and have large bone fragments. So like the size of maybe your thumbnail. This is often confused with bobcat scat, which looks just the same, but it's sort of a miniaturized version. So they're going to be segmented, shorter, and small bone fragments. So like the size of your pinky nail. Scrapes are another great sign. Once you learn what this looks like, you'll start seeing them more and more. It's essentially they've just taken their back paws and pushed up a bunch of litter and debris, and then they will urinate and defecate on top of that to really say, hey, this is my spot. It looks just like the bobcat. Like you almost couldn't tell the size difference here. So the panther and the bobcat will both scrape, but the panther's is going to be much larger. Scratches. So check trees, downed cabbage palms. Panthers love to sharpen their claws on that. Their claws are sort of like, they're very pointed, and think about like the tip of a pencil. It's going to be long and skinny, and a bobcat's is going to be even smaller. And then if you see a bear claw mark, it's going to be like the eraser end of the pencil. So it's a much more blunt marking. Tracks are really fun to look for, kind of like a game to investigate, try to figure out what it is. You don't often see the claws on a panther track, but you can. So I don't know if you can see my cursor, but here on the left, top left, you can see, because of this is kind of wet sand, there are actually four little nail markings. And then on the right, this is also a wet substrate, so you can see where their claws are. And then I want to contrast that to the dog print, which is most commonly confused for the panther print. So here are their foot pads. You can tell by the print if it's the front foot or the rear. The male prints are larger than the female prints. And then when you are identifying a dog track, look for the X factor. So you can literally draw an X through their track without touching the pads there, the toe or the main pad. And then their toes are going to be even. You can almost draw a line from across from the two toes at the top and then the two toes at the bottom, where, let's go back, where panthers, they have what's called a leading toe. So you can see it's sort of like our hand. If you put your hand in the sand to make a print, you can tell if it's the right or the left. The Panthers' toe pads are offset in such a way that you can do the same. Okay, so I have two important slides, so pay attention. Here are ways to minimize interactions. It is very exciting to see panthers out on the landscape, but we do need to be cautious to keep our distance. We want them to stay afraid and weary of humans. So there are some things that are going to help keep everyone safe, and that's being alert from dawn till dusk. You can see this trail camera image was taken at night. They do a lot of their traveling at night. They do their hunting at dusk and dawn. So be alert when you're out at that time. I mean, it's the great time to be out, right? It's the time to go birding in the morning. It's the time to go see the sunset. It's nice to walk in the evening when it's cool, but you need to be paying attention. Keep the prey away. So if you have property and you are inviting deer or other small mammals to your property, the predators are going to follow. So be cautious of that. Keep your pets and domestic livestock secure. We talked a bunch about that earlier. Landscape for safety. So don't have a bunch of thick palmetto thickets and brush right up against your house. You don't want to have a denning site or a loping site right adjacent to your home. You want to have a safe boundary, and that's not just for panthers, but for fires down here. You want to keep your house protected from things like that. So keep a kind of a buffer zone around your home. And then there's other deterrents we talked about. And when you're out recreating, take a friend. There are not just animals to consider. There are humans that can be very dangerous. We've got venomous snakes and snags and sinkholes, in the lime rock. So there's so many things out there to consider. Go with a buddy when you go out in the wild. Okay, so you are out on a hike with a friend. What do you do when you see a panther? It's listed as number 4, but it's the number 1 thing. Do not run. If you run, you are likely to incite the chase response of the predator. And this is true for bears as well. If something's running, they're usually going to chase it. So don't be that thing. Stand your ground. Keep your pets and children right up close to you. If they're down on the ground, try to pick them up without bending over. You want to make yourself bigger. You do not want to be smaller. You don't want to bend over. So you're with your friend. You're going to get together, maybe open your jacket or take your backpack and lift it over your head. You want to appear like some big scary thing that this cat does not want to mess with. You don't want to turn away from the animal. You don't want to give them an opportunity to get the jump on you. So face the animal and then step backwards away from them. Then take another step backwards. You don't have to hustle up backwards. Just go slowly, and then hopefully the animal realizes it's safe and they move on. If they don't, then maybe try going in a different direction. Maybe there is food or their kittens are nearby and you need to move away from them. So pay attention to how the animal is acting. And then if the animal does come at you, which is very, very uncommon, you want to fight back. So eyes, ears, nose, mouth, that sort of thing is what you want to focus on. And many, many people throughout history have survived an encounter with a puma because they fought back. So be careful when you're driving out there. There's tons of wildlife and animals that don't know how to cross the road. So pay attention, especially at night. Here is our website. If you have any photos that you'd like to submit, we rely on our community to send in their sightings to help us understand what's going on. We have a wildlife incident number you can call here if there's sort of like an emergency situation. And then if you want to support our panther conservation program, you can purchase the cat tag. You can also donate to the Florida Panther Research and Management Trust Fund. And they are the ones that fund our program. So that completes my presentation. Here again is my email. I'm going to stop sharing and see if anybody has questions, or maybe you want to talk about a specific slide. So we often, I feel like this is a complicated question, and I I don't know that I can clearly answer it, but usually we do have sort of a comment based on some new development. I don't know exactly what the comment is on that specific property, but I think when we have development like that come up, there's usually a mitigation involved. So maybe they want to build in this location. Is there another location that can augment, say, like a wildlife corridor? So sometimes it's a balance. So we understand that development is going to happen. I don't know that there's anything our agency would do about that, or can do really. But I would say a development comes up adjacent to another development. Maybe the mitigation for that is augmenting a corridor so cats and other wildlife can move through this area more safely. So I think that's something that happens often with development, is sort of trying to get the best outcome from not the best situation. We do not have plans for that to happen, but I think it's something in the back of everyone's mind where we, you know, every time we collar a cat, or if we pick up a cat that was hit by a car, we take samples from that animal. So we have a database of information on all the cats, and you know, that's something that we sort of keep track of, is the health of the population, the genetic diversity of the population. So it's something that we know about and we understand as an aspect to their recovery, but there's no plan as of now to go get more cats and to bring them here. We're hoping as they continue to recover and expand north that the inbreeding won't be as significant of an impact on them. It depends. It depends on what has happened to the animal. So, for example, there was a cat hit a couple of months ago on, I believe, oil well, and the cat did not die from the vehicle strike. So the cat went to the zoo, was sort of examined, and they observed the cat for some time. The cat, you know, I think the cat was kind of beat up and sore, obviously, from the interaction with the vehicle, but the cat seemed to be fine. So in that case, we collared the male cat and then released him onto the Panther refuge nearby, and we're able to monitor that cat's movement. So that was kind of unique in the fact that it didn't succumb to the trauma from the car. Sometimes, for example, if the cat is stabilized here locally, many cats go up to White Oak, which is a conservation center in northern Florida. They're big in conservation with species from throughout the world, but they have some sort of more wild rehab enclosures, so like 10 acres that are fully enclosed with native vegetation, so they can monitor and make sure the cat is fully capable of functioning in the wild before we release them. So a lot of them will go to White Oak if we believe they're able to go back into the wild. If they're not, for example, sometimes they might go to another zoo. One of the cats that wasn't able to be re-released went to the Tampa Zoo. And that's usually where most of the Panthers that a zoo has have come, you know, an animal like Athena Athena is at our zoo here in Naples, and she wasn't able to be released into the wild because she was so young. So, you know, she ended up at our zoo. I believe as of now, we have not documented any of the females raising offspring to adulthood. And that's based on camera data that we have. Sometimes we might see a female with offspring, and then too soon after, she has another litter. So it's like there wasn't enough time for her to have raised them to, say, at least 9 months, get pregnant, and then have another litter. So based on the mostly camera data that we are collecting in the area, we haven't documented any of the litters surviving, but we are documenting, you know, I would say there's at least 2 or 3, potentially more females north of the Caloosahatchee. So we're having a more opportunity for each one of these females to have an offspring. So I think that bring some optimism to that situation. So though we haven't documented survivorship yet, there's still more chances for that to happen. I think a fair amount of people are seeing the cats on the landscape. Correct identification is something I always, you know, think of. It can be hard. You know, we have a lot of people that move into the estates. I mean, I've talked to many people that have just moved there, you know, back when we were having festivals and things like that. And so many people didn't actually know about panthers. I mean, they moved to Florida and had no idea they were here. Now they live in Golden Gate Estates and they see one in their backyard and they're shocked. So we have that group of people that, you know, are totally unaware of this animal being there. And then we have people that have lived there, you know, for as long as it's been the estates, that have seen, you know, more, and they've seen maybe less over time because of the development. And then we've got everybody in between. We really encourage people to get a photo so that we really know that it was a panther. But, you know, I think people are documenting them. I think the panthers that are inhabiting areas or portions of the estates know how to travel in the estates, you know, so they're going to be more active at night when people aren't out. But yeah, I mean, they're there, they're using the corridors and things like that. I've documented them on my property at nighttime. So yeah, the residents of the estates are certainly seeing them, especially people that have attractants like livestock. So yeah, helping to make sure those residents have their animals protected, maybe getting them trail cameras so they can understand the activity of the animals that are coming by would be helpful as well. Thank you for having me, and please don't be shy or don't hesitate to reach out to me via email. I'm happy to answer more questions or go into more detail, anything like that. I'm your resource for Panther information.